context. In the first panel, we're going to speak about carbon neutrality and NRRP, what role is to be played by Italian farming. We've seen that Italian farming is quite unique in the sense that its agri-food chain produces the highest number of PDO products in Europe and in the world. We are going to ask our guests to come over so that those who are following us remotely can hear what we're saying. So the Italian agri-food chain is capable of producing the highest number of PDO products in the world and in Europe, of course. And even though it's a sector that has done a lot, still it has to focus much more on sustainability as a further element, setting it apart from others. The farm sector has to play a central role in order to achieve carbon neutrality because it can act on at several levels, reducing emissions, adopting advanced technologies. For instance, let us consider agriculture 4.0, and also because it can store stably CO2 in the form of carbon in the ground, fighting against soil degradation, and also because it can reduce emissions that are linked to the use of fossil fuels. And this is also something that we saw this morning thanks to the production of renewable and sustainable energy and bioenergy. So let us ask our guests to come to the stage. We have here Mr. Lorenzo Ciccarese, Department for monitoring, environmental monitoring and protection and for the conservation of biodiversity, while remotely Dr. Stefano Vaccari should be with us. And with you, we are going to talk about carbon neutrality and the role of the NRRP in this context. I will start from Mr. Ciccarese, and you followed this morning's session. It was a very dense session in terms of topics. In the NRRP, we hear about that it speaks about digestate, its enhancement, and many other opportunities for innovation and development that are offered by the plan. Animal husbandry and farming can contribute significantly to reducing emissions. We hear about anaerobic digestion. The document speaks about it in an innovative manner, and this can also be the best way to reduce animal husbandry emissions. So there are many topics that can be addressed. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon to everyone. Well, the key word here is carbon neutrality. You know that around this notion of carbon neutrality, there is a scientific debate which is very intense and interesting from a theoretical standpoint, but also in practical terms, because there is this new idea of carbon neutrality and bioenergy has led to revising European policies and strategies in terms of putting value on bioenergy. I can sum things up for you. Always a good idea to review things. Bioenergy is related to the fact that vegetation can fix carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and do that for periods of time that are more or less long in the biomass in soil. So this biomass can be then used to replace fossil fuels, and when it is used for producing energy is produced in a different way compared to fossil fuels, and so this does not have an impact on the carbon cycle. So it's renewable in this sense, differently from fossil resources which use carbon that was stored for millions of years in the ground. And when a fossil energy source, such as gas or oil, is burned, what it does, it frees this amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, leading to the greenhouse effect. So there is this difference. But there's also a difference, and I think it would be important to reflect on this, because we should look at the topic of enhancing biogas and bioenergy in general. So there's this aspect of carbon neutrality, so renewability of the bioenergy, and sustainability. And sustainability depends on the type of energy, how it was produced. It depends on how much non-biogenic energy, so fossil energy, was employed to produce that amount, the unit of energy. There are many studies that say that 1 unit of fossil energy is used to produce between 34 and 40 units of bioenergy. According to others, this ratio is very much different, and a part of fossil fuel-related energy is burned, used for every 4 units of energy produced from bioenergy. And this, of course, depends on the type of bioenergy and the techniques that are used. So there is a vast literature on this topic, and we have to make sure that enhancement policies take into account this. But at the moment, policies seem to be in favor of bioenergy. This has been done in the past directive on renewable energy, which was also transposed in Italy. There was an enhancement of bioenergy. And for the future, scenarios are even promising. For instance, let us begin from the special report of the IPCC 1.5, which said what it would happen to the planet if we were to exceed warming by 1.5 degrees. And this report states that there is a very great potential in terms of bioenergy to cover future energy demands equal to 27%. We speak about bioenergy, so not ecological potential, biological potential, but economic one. So 27% is an extraordinary figure. It's very high, but bearing in mind the evolution of the energy market in the years to come. This is what the IPCC states. And then also the International Agency for Energy, International Energy Agency, states the same. And so there are very promising scenarios. This also goes for the scenarios depicted by the European Union. But the problem is how to make this these renewable energy sources sustainable. And then there are several topics, for instance, biogas. There is the aspect of territoriality and the size of the plants that are used to enhance biogas. Then there is another aspect I wanted to draw attention on. When we speak about relationships between climate change and farming, generally, and this has also happened this morning, we tend to look at the role that farming has in connection to mitigating climate change. According to the IPCC and the UN Convention on Climate Change, mitigation means reduction of emissions. Then relationships are very much more complex, really, and we must look at these relationships, complex relationships that include, first of all, the impacts of climate change on farming, agriculture. Thanks to the IPCC reports and to a huge number of independent studies, we know that this 1.5 degree increase in mean temperature was sufficient to lead to very significant effects that concern the alteration of physiological processes, the early maturation, early blossoming, so a disalignment between the cycle of pollinators and flowering, so very important impacts. And then another report that was published in July this year by the IPCC states very clearly that there is a connection between the increase in global mean temperature and the increase in the intensity, frequency, and an impact of extreme climate events. And these extreme climate events have an impact on all production sectors, but particularly on agriculture. So when we speak about connections and relationships, we have to look at impacts, at the mitigation capabilities that should be enhanced, because farming too has to play a part. And then there is also another aspect that should be considered, which has to do with adaptation, because the farming sector, because it's one that suffers much more than others from climate change impact, has to adapt to these changes. This in part has already occurred, but as we heard from the president of Coldiret this morning, we need really the contribution of science. Mr. Ceccarese, thank you for your words. We will get back to figures then, because somehow farming for future, you've seen it this morning, it really implies taking responsibility. So a number of firms decided to take responsibility for many things, because there are figures, the figures you were referring to, the figures that ISPRA has always been pointing at and has based its actions on, and figures tell us what Mr. Ceccarese was telling us. So I'm going to go to our friends from CREA. Mr. Ceccarese ended his presentation by saying that research is very important. And this morning we heard how so many resources from the recovery plan will be or should be devoted in that direction, the direction of research. So Stefano Vaccari, who's the Director General of CREA, how important is this aspect, the aspect of research? First of all, thank you for inviting me. As an agronomist, I would like to say that there are some very important words to consider. Sustainability, the sustainability of farms is decisive to understand that farmers will have to embrace change. So the perception of climate change is evident in the farms. It has an impact on their income. The interpreter apologizes, but the voice comes and goes. Mr. Vaccari, there seem to be some difficulties in the connection, because the sound is fragmented. I'm practically almost inside my computer. I cannot get any closer than this. Well, you will probably transport yourself through the screen here if you get closer. I can perhaps lower the volume a bit. Let's see what happens. Okay, it seems to be a bit better. So let us lower the volume. So what is key at this very time is understanding that the solution that research offers have to be sustainable from the corporate standpoint. That is why the impact that the CBAS had on the development of technologies, this impact was important from the standpoint of firms, in the sense that we need to solve some of the problems that affect animal husbandry firms, such as the disposal of waste, the cost of managing this waste, the cost of energy. If we can give an answer to firms in connection to how to face these costs, the problem of carbon neutrality will come as a consequence. And this, as CREA, is very important, because research is very much attentive to the topic of corporate industrial costs. We have more than 10 PDOs in Italy with a very high value, with a higher value than the others. Out of these 10, 9 have to do with the management of waste. There is only one that is not related to the well-being of animals or the management of waste. In the first 3 PDOs in the world, 3 are produced in the Po Plain with a very strong impact on waste. So for Italy, it is strategic to provide an operational solution from the standpoint of biogas before even addressing the issue of carbon neutrality, but first and foremost for farm sustainability. And in this sense, the research studies conducted by CREA are very advanced. Thank you for your words. So let us get back to ISPRA. What do figures tell us about what we saw this morning, Farming for Future? Can this have an impact in a strong way on the situation, as the General Director was saying? Yes, here too, figures are important. We at ISPRA, as you might know, we do reporting connected to the UN Convention on Climate Change in connection to greenhouse gases. Farming contributes to 7.1% of greenhouse gases at the national level. In the past year, 2019, which is the year for which we have data, this amounts to 418 million tons of CO2 at the national level, 30% of which are produced by agriculture. Out of this million tons of CO2, many come from animal husbandry, rice growing, and in fact, methane and nitrogen oxide are the gases that prevail, that are much more common than CO2. So this also gives you an idea of what are the target sectors in order to reduce the contribution of farming and animal husbandry to the production of greenhouse gases, to reach the climate goals that were established at EU level. We are speaking about fit for 55. So we need to reduce emissions by 55% by 2030 and also get to net zero emissions by 2050 in terms of national emissions. So animal husbandry and other forms of farmland management are the main target. And this means that CREA gives us suggestions and options that are very interesting, for instance, concerning the management of animal waste or let's say providing animals with fodder that does not have a negative impact on the atmosphere. So all solutions that can reduce emissions significantly, bearing in mind that in order to reach the climate goals of 2030 and 50, we will have to mainly act on the energy sectors. But in terms of mitigation based on carbon sequestration, we have carried out a study a few weeks ago on organic farming. As you know, the EU strategy and Farm to Fork have a 25% target of farmland converted to organic farming. So considering that AUU continues to decrease as it did in the past, business as usual, to get to 25%, we would have to have 3.1 million hectares of organic farming land. Now we are slightly over 2 million. So this means, I don't have data yet for 2020, but it means having 96,000 hectares more every year. We studied how much it costs. It means 10 million euros every year to have this 95,000 hectares more and have 3.1 or 3.2 million in 2030. I will stop you here precisely because we must try and understand if these resources are there. And we will ask to the director of CREA with the NRRP, are there sufficient opportunities to support the introduction of the innovation Mr. Ciccarese was referring to? So Mr. Ciccarese has highlighted many interesting points.
Brevissimi flash su ogni punto. È vero, sulle emissioni i settori target sono zootecnia e risicoltura. Sulla risicoltura però noi abbiamo dei dubbi molto forti. Ieri ero a Vercelli, abbiamo fatto il punto della ricerca proprio sul riso. È vero che la risaia produce metano, ma in realtà qui c'è tutto un grosso dilemma per il fatto che comunque la zona umida lo produrrebbe comunque. Quindi l'agricoltura noi abbiamo delle riserve importanti.
We have some important reserves with respect to what IPCC said. It's true that we have to find a system that is compatible with respect to the management of biogas. From a biological standpoint, things are slightly different. We have to have 1 million hectares of organic farming by 2030. We can do that. Italy is pretty far ahead. We are now recording 16% of our SAU. Well, resources are there. So in the Common Agricultural Policy, and I would like to remind everyone that the Common Agricultural Policy is the most important policy that exists in Europe. Well, farm to fork is anyway linked to the Common Agricultural Policy. The 5 goals of the Common Agricultural Policy are very clearly stated. So we have clear that the first mandate is to increase the productivity of farming, which means using better the instruments that we have available. But it's the Common Agricultural Policy, our beacon, that is guiding us. And in the Common Agricultural Policy, the resources to move from 16 to 25% of organic farming are actually provided. So Italy is a bit far ahead of other countries. Well, it is the first country in Europe in terms of organic farms. We are the second country in terms of surface because we are a small country, but we are the first in Europe in terms of organic farming. If the goal of farm to fork is to reach 25%, well, Italy can make it. Then the problems are not that obvious, and the CREA research is working very much on this because we have to grow our organic farming islands. Sorry for the play upon words. This is not something that has to be protected from conventional areas. It means open lines for parasites, fungi and bugs that are way broader. So there's a new management of farmland which is more challenging, and research is going to play a key role to avoid that the growth of organic farming has an impact on the rest of the territory. But I would like to reassure you because the resources are available. Thank you. And last question for Mr. Ciccarese. The question is written behind you. Green possible, that's the question we opened our day with. So what do you think about it? Well, if you allow me 20 seconds to conclude what I was saying earlier. So to give you an idea of what organic soils can do, there's not much in literature in this regard. And once again, research must give a contribution. We have tools the actual ability of organic soils and the potential of organic soils in terms of carbon sequestration. So, of course, to help counter climate change. Based on the indication we have, based on the available data from the north to the south of Italy, every year we've got 1 million tons of CO2 that are sequestrated by organic soils. We have to have very clear what the role of farming is when it comes to carbon sequestration. It is important, but up to a certain point, especially when we see this service, when we see this contribution of nature to people according to a new concept that is gaining ground, because ecosystemic systems is considered too anthropocentric. So carbon sequestration has to be considered in combination with all the other services that farming offers. And I will now move to your question. So how can we make agriculture greener? Well, that's pretty evident in the endless scientific literature that is available, and also in the orientations that are given, for example, by the Convention for Biodiversity or the Convention for Climate of the European Strategy for Biodiversity. We need to keep tabs on the two very important socio-ecological problems, climate change and biodiversity. We can't think of having watertight compartment decisions or policies without taking into account the importance that farming has for the conservation of biodiversity. This morning, I heard someone say that human existence is at risk, as Joe Biden said the other day. This is due to climate change. But we have a risk of 1 million species at risk of becoming extinct. So our duty to protect at least part of these species that risk becoming extinct within a few decades, well, this duty is ethical, moral even. So there's an intrinsic value. The species are important for our well-being, for our prosperity. Because as the World Economic Forum says, 55% of GDP depends on nature and biodiversity. And for Italy, it's even higher than that. So biodiversity, nature-based solution, organic farming, sustainable agriculture, agriculture that looks at the longer term, services which include, for example, biogas. These things are all important because they contribute to mitigation. There's another important thing that was mentioned this morning, digestate. Organic farming has a problem when it comes to the potential deployment. We don't have any organic matter available. We don't have manure. And to sustain and support organic farming or any form of sustainable agriculture, from family agriculture to diversified farming systems, so we need to keep farming together for all the services it offers. And we have to bear in mind that the ability to adapt to climate change depends on genetic diversity. Unfortunately, we have neglected this dimension in the past, but there are some very interesting research studies that were carried out in the 1970s regarding genetic erosion on the grains of Sicily, of Apulia, let alone what happened in other countries in the world. So we need to keep farming together to protect diversity and to respond to climate change. Thank you. Thank you very much. So last question for CREA General Manager, Vaccari. Well, it's not actually a yes or no answer, but just to highlight, green possible. Is it green possible? Yes, absolutely. It is green possible. We're not starting from scratch. Italy is the platform of biodiversity in Europe, and it has proven this over the years. CREA alone is the biggest storage of biodiversity in Italy. We've got 119 collections with hundreds of thousands of elements. For example, we have the biggest collections in the world of vines and olives, or endless collections of cereals and grains. So over the years, farming managed to protect biodiversity, which has no comparison in the world. One thing I want to stress, it's men changing their behavior. Organic farming is made by men, not by nature. Organic farming methods are the best man-made technologies to produce. Without a big entrepreneur, a great entrepreneur, we can't have any organic farming. This was stressed by the new common agricultural policy, the accumulation of knowledge. It's a pillar, so it's up to us to correct ourselves. And that's very important. Italy has widespread knowledge that other countries don't have. If we think that 1 hectare in Italy produces way more than France and Germany in terms of added value, we might understand what's the ability of every farmer we have here. So protecting biodiversity, well, I totally agree, is a duty. Changing the production system towards systems of greater efficiency is a duty, but without a fundamental contribution of science and the entrepreneurs or the farmers that are working in the fields, that will be impossible. So I'm certain that we won't make it, and that we will make it. That green possible is possible because we've got the best entrepreneurs, the best farmers in Europe, and very robust research. Thank you very much, Stefano Vaccari, General Manager of CREA, our friends from ISPRA, Lorenzo Ciccarese. Well, numbers, science, thank you both.